I'm trying my best to put myself in a single parent's shoes and trying to imagine how difficult it must be for the single parent to help let's say, a preteen or even a teenager understand just how difficult life is as a single parent. This must be the hardest thing for a parent to do. In fact, I imagine that most parents don't even try. Imagine sitting down with your child and saying, "Do you have any idea how difficult it is for me as a single parent?" And I think what makes it even more difficult is the fact that as a single parent, you have no right. Right? You have no right to tell your child how difficult it is. In fact, any good parent, you are a good parent if your children have no idea how tough you have it. Now that's tough. Right? That's very tough. It's much like when you're flying on an airplane, when the pilot experiences turbulence or comes upon a situation that's difficult for them to handle. Their job is to make sure that you remain calm. They need to absolutely make sure that when they communicate things to you, they say it with a very calm voice so that you don't panic and actually make the situation and circumstance even more dangerous, because an airplane is so confined. And that's how I think of parenting. Parenting is much like piloting a plane, but what makes it worse is the fact that most parents did not go to a piloting school. There's no school necessarily for being a parent where you get a qualification or a degree or a PhD and earn a handsome amount of money just for being a parent. If only such a world existed. I mean, it does in other countries where the government will actually pay you for having children for a certain period of time. But unfortunately, most parents don't have the luxury of living in such countries and around the world. But for the rest of us who are living in the normal countries where our governments do not appreciate our parents for having children in that way, I think it's so important for us to empathize with single parents. And we've done this so many times because we've been focusing on these conversations and discussions on appreciating or learning to empathize with parents in general. And I think it's very even more important when zooming into single parents and focusing on the challenges that they face, because everything that united parents face, so parents that are doing it together, mom and dad, anything that they experience, a single parent experiences it double. Like, I imagine that a parent who has to raise a child by themselves has to be up more times during the day, just feeding the child, changing your nappy, and all of those things. But even in your preteens and teen years, they have to go to work while also making sure that they are there for you and that they get enough rest and that they prepare a healthy meal for you and that they can afford to give you the best life that they can manage to give you. And I think this is something that we, especially as young people, need to learn to empathize with. And it's important to do it before it's too late. Most of us, unfortunately, only get to appreciate our parents. And this is so sad, right? Most of us only get to appreciate, especially our single parents, when we're in our adult lives and life starts, you start to, especially when you finish and leave varsity, you start to understand just how difficult it is, let alone to work a job, but to get a job, let alone keeping a job, right? Just getting a job. You learn to understand just how difficult life is. Like the challenge of having to watch your friends live a better life than you, and now you can't blame that on your parents because you're the one who's working. Your parents have stopped driving. Now they've put you at the wheel and said, now be responsible for your own life. And not even most of us, each and every one of us, whether you're in primary, high school, or even in varsity, each and every one of us are going to get to that point where we need to start taking responsibility for our own lives. And once you get to that point, you will then have to look back, right? Especially when you start getting the more and more responsibility you take of your own life, you will then begin to use and measure that and now reflect back on what must your parents have been going through. I don't know. I'm thinking of weightlifting. I'm sure there's a better example that I could use. If you're doing lifting weights and you're picking up 2 kgs, I mean, 2 kgs is just a packet of sugar in your house is 2 kgs. 2 kgs is not a lot, right? When you're picking up 2 kgs, you have no idea what the person who's picking up 20 kgs is going through, how sore their muscles must be. Or if you're starting to jog and you're jogging maybe 1 to 3 kilometers per day or 3 times a day, if that's what you're doing, you cannot relate to the person who's running across country. You don't know what kind of physical pain and tension their body goes through. And I think that's exactly the same with a single parent. It's very difficult to explain to a teenager and a preteen just how difficult it is to be a parent. And remember, as we've established, right, that a good parent is someone who doesn't even make you think or feel the fact that it's difficult to be a parent. If you're a teenager or you're a preteen and your parent is constantly reminding you about paying their bills or about how difficult it is to hold a job or how difficult it is to navigate the world and go and use public transport or even owning a car, it's such an expensive thing. If you're a teenager or you're a preteen or you're a young adult and your parent is constantly making you mindful of the challenges they face in life, that's not a good parent. A good parent is the one who doesn't even make you feel how difficult it is. What they'd usually do is surround themselves with friends, with people at church that they can share these challenges with and encourage one another so that when they come home, they don't drop the stress on your feet. And that's such an important thing to acknowledge, right? Especially if you're lucky enough to have a parent who is managing everything in their life, a single parent that is, who's managing everything in their life in such a way that you don't even feel the challenges they face. You don't even feel it when they've gone to work and they've had such a bad meeting that it's affected them emotionally. Or when they've been rejected for a job that they applied for, that it's been affecting them emotionally, or when they've been under so much stress, not just because of work, but just because of having to pay rent or having to pay a bond or having to pay, a bill that they owe or credit that they owe. If a parent is making you not feel how challenging or difficult that is, then that is a good parent. And that's a parent that you really need to learn to appreciate. We need to learn to appreciate those parents without them having to remind us that we need to appreciate them. And I don't know, I remember back when I was young, I don't ever remember a time when I sat down and thought to myself, my mother is a single mother raising 4 children, which was my mother's circumstance, right? Raising 4 children by herself with minimal help from our fathers. And that left a lot of weight on her shoulders that she needed to carry, and a lot of stress that she needed to navigate in her mind. And to top it all off, my mother's not a person who has, to this day, a lot of friends around her to encourage her. She does go to church and she does get encouraged there, but she doesn't have lifelong friends that have been able to encourage her throughout the years. That, I can tell you now, makes life a lot harder. And it's only something you will understand when you get older, that, oh my goodness, I should have known just how bad my parents have it, or just how bad they've been having it all this time. And this is something so important for us to think about in our youth, right? Because imagine not being able to appreciate what your parents have been doing for you this entire time until they're no longer in the world. And that's a thing about when you don't appreciate something, when you don't understand the amount of weight it carries. You take it for granted. You don't say thank you. You don't say happy birthday when it's their birthday. You don't make them a coffee in the morning. And with the older you get, the revelation then comes to you of what they've actually been through. And then you begin to say, I wish I appreciated them more. I wish I took selfies with mom. I wish I told her that she looked good or he looked good, because there are a lot of single fathers as well. I mean, I'm using my mother because it's my circumstance. I'd hate to make it seem as though single fathers don't have it hard, because they are out there. And growing up has just taught me so much about the dynamics of the world, because when you're younger, you really live in this fairy tale where you think the world is black and white. And then you get older and you realize that there are so many colors to the world. The more friends you have and understand their circumstances, they introduce you and expose you to their circumstances and situations which are vastly different from yours. Then you learn to appreciate the rainbow that is life, right? And that's just to explain that there are very different circumstances that people grow up under. So what I mean is, some of us are raised by our aunts, some of us are raised by our grandmothers, our uncles, our fathers are the sole provider, caregiver, nurturer. The only person who or people we know to show us compassion as we're growing up. And I mean, we always touch on this, and I'm not even going to expand on it much, especially as we've been covering this conversation or discussion or theme of empathizing with our parents. We always touch on the fact that this is not to make excuses for the mistakes that our parents make. That is the last thing that I want to use this discussion and conversation to do. But I want to instead encourage you to take a moment and think about the things that your parents have to endure for your sake. Think about them deeply. And then begin to ask yourself, when my mother has a tough day, or when my dad has a tough day, or when my grandmother has a tough day, who do they talk to? When they look pretty, who tells them that they look pretty today? Should I not be the person who puts it on my shoulders and makes it my responsibility to tell my parent, wow, mom, dad, grandma, aunt, uncle, you look good today, right? Obviously not in a bad way, but just in a platonic, appreciating your guardian kind of way. You look good today. And all the best of luck today at work. And waking up in the morning and making them a cup of coffee or a cup of tea before they've even asked you to do so, and doing your chores as often as you can before they've even asked you to do so. And I think that's one of the best ways that you can appreciate a parent.